Good afternoon, everybody. It's Matt, it's Jim, it's SEC football. What more could you possibly want? Um, early so far, early, excuse me, early, Matt, in media week, and things are looking pretty fun for the guys down in Tampa.
Yeah, it's been, there's always a this is your return to football. You get spring games, in April, really, but those are taking such a hit too, where they almost feel like they're, getting to the point of irrelevancy in a way. And this is really your return to football, to the football activities. Fall camp's just right around the corner now.
Right. I think that I've been to these media days, both basketball and football, and normally you don't get a lot of media. But from what my folks are saying down in Tampa, this might break a record for the attendance at a SEC media day, or I'm sorry,
Wow.
week.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this is the first time it's been in Tampa. It's been held in Atlanta and Birmingham in the
Right.
past. Um, so new venue, maybe that helps some with the attendance.
Well, I'm sure it does. It's also, trust me when I tell you that you don't want to be in Hoover, Alabama this time of the year. It's
No.
it's not it's not pleasant. So my guess is that they're going to float this thing around. Probably, there's Tampa this year. They'll probably go to They already announced they're going to Nashville next year, and so I believe that there's a lot of the SEC's looking forward to seeing more and more of the bigger cities, because you're gonna you get Texas in there, you get from that standpoint. So I do believe that they're gonna start cycling it around a little bit, and get you know Atlanta and the Birmingham area has traditionally been, and then of course the summer one, or spring, depending upon what it is usually Destin on the beach.
Hmm.
So I do think that they're going to at least move this one, the football one, around, because it makes more sense.
Yeah. The coaches meetings, I think, is what you're referring to,
Right.
and they are typically held in Destin. You know, Famously, I think of Paul Feinbaum having his show set up on the beach, what seems like every single year, and guys will stop by for interviews. But I guess it's good. Media days isn't really like it's not a public event, so I'm kind of curious by the movement of it and why they want to move it. But they do, and it's moving around to different venues, whether that be good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem through these things, having you know set up the network stuff and getting things together. I think what they're looking for, they move it to Tampa, and you start getting you know, uh, big market broadcasters involved. There's a radio row, much like there is in football. I'm sorry, in the Super Bowl.
Hmm.
And I think that what the SEC wants to do is to expand. Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of people, and this was the ACC's problem for a long time. Everything, it was like everything's in Alabama. It's like every time we looked up, it was Alabama or it was Atlanta. Now, again, I got no beef with either place. But, it got to the point where you're just saying, look, this is just silly. We're traveling all this way. And the folks in Birmingham, or in Atlanta seem to be the only people they care about. And that fair or not, it seems to be that, it's moving these things around does help get the word out and interest out. And so I do think that strategically it makes sense to do it and just not unlike the NFL draft. You want to move it around because you want engagement. Now, again, you're right. This is not a public forum, but from a media standpoint, it's very important that you have that kind of access.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because these are all media markets that the SEC does rely on, and they play out of.
Hmm.
Nashville may not have the biggest SEC team, but it is a strong market for the SEC. The same goes,
Hmm.
Tampa doesn't have a team located in it that plays in the Southeastern Conference, but again, you're right there in that same kind of area, not far down the road, or well, somewhat far down the road from Gainesville, but still a market that you play in. Um, you know, it wouldn't surprise me to see this thing in Austin at some point down the road.
Sure.
I think that's a possibility. You even maybe you start thinking about LSU and New Orleans. All these are potential venues, potential markets that they could move this thing around to.
I think New Orleans would be a great pickup.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that way kind of. And by the way, if you're talking Missouri, you can go to St. Louis or Kansas City.
Yeah, I think the only thing where they would run into it there is they have or the general discourse that I see regarding Missouri is that
Hmm.
if there's like one team that doesn't feel like it's in the SEC footprint, it's Missouri.
Yeah,
So
but if I'm trying to market the SEC brand, you know, I'm more than happy to travel there. Just it's a one-off, right?
yeah,
You go, you do it, and you do it in either St. Louis or Kansas City. And some people, a lot of the broadcasters in those cities, it's a big time situation, especially in St. Louis. If you did it in St. Louis, you got KMX, you got all the major radio stations, Cardinals would be there. So you've got a lot of opportunity to spread the SEC, word out and moving from there.
yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely still an opportunity market for sure.
Hmm. So yesterday in his opening remarks, um, Commissioner Sankey said that now he didn't come out and say it straight up, but he did say that if things don't work out with the in this legislative stuff that they're working on, the Save College Sports Act, that the SEC has had discussions among the presidents that they may decide to just strike out on their own.
Yeah, and I saw some reaction to this, and somebody was like, I think if I remember correctly, it was, and it's a post on X, so 90,
Hmm.
98 to 99% of the time they're disingenuous in nature, anyways.
Hmm.
But they made the remark of who's going to watch the SEC outside of the SEC footprint if they were to break off on their own. And I think that's a misconception into what the SEC breaking off on its own really is.
Hmm.
Because if the SEC breaks off on its own, it's something where they are governing themselves. It's not saying that they're only going to play SEC football teams. It's a self governance where you get those rule sets
Right.
and you are able to enforce them regarding the transfer portal, regarding NIL, all of that stuff. That would allow you to build frameworks and get more towards that professional model. It would be them breaking away on their own.
Well, I think that they wouldn't do it unless the Big Ten did it.
Yeah, it definitely would not be a venture that they set out on their own.
And I think at this point in time, you know, there's that bill's never coming out of Congress. But the thing that it has spooked the conferences, and they know something's going to happen, right? If it's not the bill, it'll be something else.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that they're looking at it and going, you know what? What we end up with in that case, right, is the mini NFL. Because if those two teams, if those two decide to partner up in some way, shape, or form, they don't have to pool their money. They don't have to do any of that. But let's just say they strike a deal where the where they would play each other in a scheduling situation, not every week, but doing that. Can you imagine, what a Georgia, you know, a Georgia Michigan game, or a Ohio State Alabama game? If you picked one a week, right? They would just crush everybody else. Nobody on the planet would be watching other football games. And that would, so that's what I'm saying. And then at the end of the year, the season, they just, the two best teams, one from the Big Ten and the one from the SEC, plays each other for their national championship.
Yeah, and that's that's one model that you can go after. You can go after a model where they still have like playoffs in the two. You would assume that again, them breaking off. You have to have some sort of belief that it wouldn't be just exclusively those two conferences and the teams that are in those conferences. Like there are teams outside of the SEC and outside of the Big Ten that would also that are brands that you would also want to be a part of it. And that's where it's tough is now you're, some of these teams are stuck in these conferences for a while. You obviously have Notre Dame and what's going on with them. And there's collective bargaining agreements. I don't know how those would play into, this side of things, if they would play into it at all. That they're, or not collective, but their media rights. The media rights.
The grant of rights?
Yeah, the grant of rights. And I don't know how that would play into this, but I would assume that it would play into it, to some degree, and what they are across the different conferences. Because if you're talking about, embarking on their own, I'm sure it's something that they're talking about with all the other conferences as well, because there's probably, some sort of belief, or not some sort of belief. There is a belief that the NCAA has no power. They currently have no power. And right now, the legislation that's in Congress has not been moving forward well.
I mean, I think more than anything, it's kind of an idle threat. It's like, if we don't get, and I'm just saying, because the University of Michigan president last week basically said the same thing. That we don't feel like the NCAA or anyone, frankly, is is looking after the student athlete, is looking after what we're looking after. And so, I mean, look, if you got the two biggest groups, let's see, what's the SEC's got, 16 teams?
Yep.
And the Big Ten has, I think, was it
18 or 20? I think
it's 18. It's not 20.
It's not 20.
All right, so do your back of the napkin math there, and you could easily. I don't think they want to exceed the 32, 35 range.
Yeah.
And that's why I call it the mini NFL.
Yeah.
Because once you start getting above that 32 level, it becomes very messy.
Okay. Yeah.
From a scheduling standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's where you start looking at and thinking about, because when you look at the SEC and the Big Ten from top to bottom, if you're going down this, this super conference route that they would in essence be creating, it's like, well, I would probably, I'd probably rather have, Florida State over Rutgers. And, as much as I do love watching Kentucky play football, Clemson's probably a little better option there. Like there's schools you can go around the country and really, you would probably pick and choose to have them in there. And there are schools that probably wouldn't, they don't really belong in that same category. Vanderbilt, for the strides that they made in football last year, still,
Mhm.
I still don't think they fully belong in that same tier. The same way that a Northwestern and the Big Ten, I don't think is the same qualifier. So there are schools on the bottom of both sides that would, leave something to be desired in the creation of this, mega conference.
Yeah, and the other thing as well, to your point, um, at that point in time, they're not a conference.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's a league.
theoretically, you could say, just like you said, theoretically, you could say, you know what, um, we're going to dump, because University of Chicago up in 1932 was a full member of the Big Ten. Uh,
Hmm.
now they're a research member of the Big Ten, but they don't play any sports in there. So in theory, you could take the Big Ten and the SEC could take the 32 best teams in the country as far as are concerned, and then the rest would have to figure out what they could do from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
It's almost like
again,
it's almost like the Premier League.
yeah, and again, these are discussions that still feel a ways down the road,
Hmm.
in terms of what they're doing. Just because there's so many intricacies that play into getting them where they ultimately see the sport going. Like
Yeah.
it and I think from 2 years ago, at this point, 2 or 3 years ago,
Hmm.
everybody kind of understood where this thing was headed. Um, and it's always been in this direction. Now the conversations are just getting a little bit louder and a little bit louder as time goes on,
Hmm.
because I think as you go through time, there are things that you believe. Now more of them are getting proved out. You believed that the
Hmm.
NCAA didn't really have a lot of power. It's now gotten proved out how little power they have and how little governance they have over the sport as a whole. And so that's really when you fully establish that the NCAA did not have a grasp of power over this thing anymore.
Hmm.
That's when the conversations probably got ramped up a good bit.
Well, I think the other part of the equation here is they the SEC and uh, the Big Ten are sitting there going, you know what, we don't have to add anybody, and they want to make people sweat as to, all this conference realignment, which we have been hearing, about forever. Um, you know, let's take Clemson in the SEC. Let's take North Carolina in the Big Ten. Blah blah blah. Um, they don't have to do it because they'll get the money anyway.
Yeah, yeah. With
So
the
go ahead.
I was just gonna. They really have the most leverage in the sport because the products that they are able to provide are just so much significantly better from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm. Well, they get the ratings.
Yeah.
The ACC and the Big 12, God love them, they don't get the ratings.
No, and going back to that argument of the where the question was posed, if the SEC broke away, who would watch them outside of the SEC?
Mhm.
Like that's a lot of people would, because these are the games that are getting, they're doing the best numbers on a week in week out basis. Yes, the
Mhm.
Big Ten, when it's Ohio State, Michigan, they draw every year for that. But
Sure.
outside of that, your Saturday matchup between we'll just go LSU and Tennessee. It's drawing a lot more eyeballs in that 8 p.m. window than your big game in the Big Ten has been over the last couple of years.
Well, there's that too. And the other thing to think about is that they're granted, okay, the SEC hasn't won a national championship in 3 years. However, they've had the most people involved in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
You want to call it that. And also, at the end of the day, from top to bottom, they're a much deeper conference. So the Big Ten is top heavy, where the SEC is more stretched out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the concentration of talent and in the Big Ten feels a lot more like it's top heavy. Really, like the SEC, it felt like for the majority of I would say
The
really
Saban
Alabama's
years,
run,
yeah.
the Saban years, even into really the end of the 2010s into the early 2020s, where Kirby Smart had compiled the talent at Georgia, and it felt like there was two or three teams that stood out above the rest,
Mm-hmm.
and the Mississippi States and the Vanderbilts and the South Carolinas and the Kentuckys, they all they didn't really have a fighting chance. But now the talent spread feels a little bit more evenly distributed amongst the SEC, and maybe that is saying more about the talent at the top of the conference as opposed to the talent at the bottom of the conference. But now the Big Ten feels a little bit more like the SEC model that you saw when Saban was at the top and you saw while Kirby was there. And really what you saw when LSU would occasionally be good or occasionally just be the best team in the country.
Right. No, I think that that kind of stuff is going to be. It's a lot more chatter than it is reality. Because when you would get into that kind of deal, right? The only people who are going to win out of that is the lawyers and get the phrase, bill, you know, um, the phrase with regard to billable hours is going to be the key phrase in that situation. It's going to be difficult to do. There's a lot that's going to be involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, you know, just change the subject just for a sec. Um, Alex Golish, who personally I think is a good guy, um, is there in Tampa and doesn't take any questions from the Tampa media.
He didn't take any.
Nope.
I'm not all that surprised by it. I mean, I guess I am. You would have expected things. He didn't leave things bad
No.
at USF, but I think he may have, I rubbed some people the wrong way, I guess, on his way out. I don't really know, how or why or any of the behind the scenes on that. But it is curious why he didn't take any questions from the Tampa media. I mean, obviously they're there in Tampa and USF is as well. It you know, I guess still some sore feelings from his departure this offseason.
I guess. I mean, to be honest, nobody, you know, nobody jumped all over him and said, Alex, you know, you did us wrong. I mean, and we're talking now all the way down from the athletic director to you know, to the local media. I don't think anything. And I think that's what surprised me most was, well, all right, I get it. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to talk about why you left USF. Fair enough. I mean, that's a fair point. Um, but I don't understand why he would duck. The guys who he definitely knew because these guys helped get him that job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
It's
to be honest and to be fair, even though we are involved in it, the media is a pretty good indicator of of how a coach is being perceived. And, if you're a guy like Alex, who is a savvy guy, a nice guy, you know, sit down, talk to you, for 10, 15 minutes, and you say, you know what, he's not a bad guy. So he gets a pass where some others wouldn't. And so I'm not saying that he's contractually obligated to talk to him, but it would have been a nice thing.
Yeah, yeah, it would have. It would have been something that you really thought, because, like you said, it didn't feel like there was all that much bad blood.
No.
It would have been something that you would thought expected, but
Hmm.
then there's also the flip side, and I know we mentioned it in regards to Kirby Smart talking yesterday,
Hmm.
but there are some guys that just don't like doing media at all, and
Hmm.
it's fair, because there are times where the media can be repetitive in their questions. They can be repetitive in the storylines, and
Hmm.
sometimes just flat out create storylines where there aren't any. Um, and that's understandable, but still, it is strange that you're, seemingly avoiding questions from people in the local media, given the circumstance and where you were at last year.
Now, in fairness to Alex, that was at the press conference. He may very well, during the course of the day, wander by and sit down and talk to some people. But
Yeah,
probably the people that he picks versus, the open press.
yeah, almost. You would hope that he sat down and talked to some of those guys in more of a one-on-one setting.
Yeah. I mean, just to sit down and say, hey, look, guys, here's what we did. Because nobody, again, that was the funny thing about it, from the athletic director to when he went, everybody wished him well. It's like it wasn't, in social media, even from that standpoint, from USF social media, everybody's like, okay, cool, we get it. It's not the first time this has happened, not the last time it will happen. So, okay, you know, um, they actually were a little more harsh on Byron Brown.
Yeah.
And that was because he went to, they were in the Cure Bowl against, I think it was Old Dominion, and he
Hmm.
suited up, but he didn't play.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
like, why did he even suit up? Okay, fine, he's going to the portal. Just take the damn jersey off and don't come over here.
Yeah. And maybe, maybe there's some bad blood or anger regarding, because
Mhm.
that is now his quarterback that's traveled with him. Maybe it's something related to that.
But I think the thing with USF was, at least people I've spoken to about it, it was like, okay, Golish is gone. We assume that, Byron's gone. But why is Byron still here? Why is he dressing up? Why is he going to the ball game? And why is he not playing?
Yeah. Yeah. Reasonable line of questioning as well.
Because, look, if you want to move to Auburn, cool. I get that. It's
Hmm.
your right. That's why they have the portal. That's how you got there in the first place. So, okay, fair enough. But I just don't. I think that was the tipping point. Much like Miami a couple of years ago when Cam Ward played the first half of the Miami bowl game and then didn't play the second half and they lost.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think now people take, with the transfer portal and the way that it works in NIL, teams, fans, media, it almost feels like they take things extremely personally. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think about the Darian Mensah, transferring from Duke to Miami,
Sure.
it seemed like people like, almost were like too invested. You won an ACC championship, and then you look at it
Mhm.
and go, yeah, well, he won an ACC championship on a team that was 7-5.
Right.
And if you think that he's not going to be better off financially, better off professionally, going forward at
Mhm.
Miami, then in fairness, you just, you dug your head in the sand and refused to pull it out and hear the
Mhm.
truth.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the new way of college sports. Yesterday, I had a short conversation with Brett McMurphy, and Brett was saying, we were both talking about being old and saying, you know what, we really don't like what's going on here. We don't like that there's no Pac-12 anymore. We don't like that that Texas and Oklahoma aren't where they were, in the Big 12. We don't like all of this movement because it doesn't help the sport at all. And it's a new world, and things are moving around, and it changes, and you get there and you're like, okay, cool, whatever it is, it is. But it's like tradition doesn't matter anymore. Now, in fairness, tradition does matter in the SEC.
Hmm. Brett actually asked a question of Kirby Smart this morning that I found I find it funny. It's
Hmm.
probably just anybody in Tennessee is not going to find this funny, but he had asked Kirby Smart about Tennessee not being an annual opponent, not being on the schedule anymore, and
Hmm.
what it was like not having one less win on the schedule.
Right.
And Kirby's response was, "You said it, not me."
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Brett. The coaches like Brett because he's fair to them. Number one. Number two, they can tell him something and he will not print it.
Hmm.
He knows his relationships, and the relationships. You know, if Kirby would say something to him today, and he knows it could get clicks for him.
Yeah,
You know, he wouldn't do it anyway
yeah,
because later in the season, when things are getting into crunch time, Kirby may say something to Brett and say, Brett will ask him a straight up question and say, look, this one's on the record. And
hmm
in that point, at that point, he's got I guess what I'm trying to say is that Brett uses his old school talent to break stories where other guys jump out there and make a hot take without anything to back it up.
yeah, yeah. It's understandable. Hey, Jim, I do need to kind of wrap up and
Okay,
head out now.
fair enough.
Yep,
Quick
yep. Sorry,
questions on your way out.
yeah, sorry to cut my time a little bit short today.
No,
Um,
no, understood.
do
Um,
want to touch on it. Red Sox are going for history tonight. They have a chance to tie the longest win streak in franchise history, which was made by that team in 1946 when they won 15 in a row. Ted Williams was
mhm,
25, I think it was said, on that team.
yeah,
That's how long ago it was. You know, they win this one and one more. They set a record for team history.
they probably aren't going to lose the rest of the season.
That'd be nice. That'd be nice. There's the old saying, and I think it's interesting. It's something that's important to put into context on this run.
Hmm.
Is there's a saying in baseball. It's you're only as hot as your next starter.
Right.
And right now, the Red Sox starting pitching has been fantastic, phenomenal. I mean, last night it feels like a little bit of a dud almost. And Peyton Tolley threw 5 2/3 innings, gave up 4 runs, and struck out 9. So it wasn't like it was not a real clunker. And tonight they get Rangers Flores back from the IL. He served a minimum stint, and now he is back and ready to go, sporting his ERA that's in the low threes against Baltimore tonight.
Well, that's like I said. It's in fairness, and we'll let you go because you got to get out of here. But in fairness, coming into the season, you could make a case that Boston had the best pitching staff in the league.
Yeah, and all of this is without Garrett Crochet, who was supposed to be the ace and the anchor of that
Right.
staff, and instead, you've got Sonny Gray that's came in and really became your number one with him absent, And then the contract that you offered to Rangers Suarez has been paying dividends with how he's been pitching. And then you couple that with a bunch of, really young arms that are pitching really well as well.
All right, bud. Let's let you get out of here so you can get to what you need to do this afternoon, and
Alrighty.
talk to you soon. You all
All right.
have a great day.
All right. Sounds good. See ya.
Bye. All right. Let's speaking of baseball, let's do a quick before we get out of here. Let's do a quick rundown of MLB for today and tonight. And the answer is okay. The schedule for tonight. It's Minnesota and Cleveland. Start off the evening at 6:40. That game is Rojas pitching for Minnesota, Messick for Cleveland. The Dodgers are in Philadelphia, 6:40. That's a TBS game for those of you wishing to watch the game tonight. Warbeski pitching for the Dodgers, and Wheeler for the Phils. Pittsburgh is at the Yankees, 7:05 first pitch. Chandler throwing for the Buccos. Warren throwing for the Yankees. Tampa Bay in Toronto. That's Rasmussen and Gausman. Pretty good pitching matchup in that game at the Bell Center. And that will be at 7:07. 7:10, Baltimore's in Boston. Bradish against Suarez. San Diego's in Atlanta, 7:15 first pitch. Buehler pitching for San Diego. Lopez pitching for Atlanta. San Francisco's in Kansas City. Mail is pitching for San Francisco. Avila is throwing for Kansas City. The Mets are in Beertown, Milwaukee. So that's a 7:40 first pitch, and that's Thornton against Sprout. Detroit at Chicago, 8:05. That's Valles pitching for Detroit. Peterson for the Cubbies. White Sox is at Texas. That's also an 8:05 start. Schultz throwing for the Pale Hose, and Rocker pitching for the Texans. Miami is at Houston. That's an 8:10 start. Phillips against Emal. Washington is in Colorado. That's an 8:40 first pitch. And that's Palmquist pitching for the Nationals, Lorenzen for Colorado. St. Louis in Anaheim. That's a 9:38 game. Libator pitching for St. Louis. Yolafa pitching for the Angels. Athletics are in Phoenix tonight. Perkins throwing for the Athletics. Drake throwing for the hometown D-backs. And then finally, another 9:40 start out in Seattle, where the Cincinnati Reds, with Burns on the hill, will take on Seattle, who has Castillo. So that's your ball games for tonight. Quick look at the standings before we get out of here. And that is, let's taking the Eastern Conference, the AL East. It's the Rays by a game and a half over the Yankees, and 6 games back are the hard-charging Red Sox. The Orioles are 9 games back. The Blue Jays are 11.5 off the pace. In the Central, it's the Pale Hose. The White Sox leading the Guardians by a game, leading Minnesota by I lost my place. Minnesota is down by 5. The Tigers are down by 6.5. Kansas City's 13 out. The Mariners, 1 game over 500 in the somewhat pathetic AL West, is a half a game ahead of the Rangers, 3.5 games ahead of Houston, 7.5 games ahead of the Athletics, and 11 games ahead of the Halos. All right, let's move to the National League real quick. National League East, Braves continue to lead. Phillies hanging there at 3 back. Marlins are 7 back. The Nationals are 8 back. And the Mets are at this point 17 games off of the pace. Milwaukee is your team in Central Division. Excuse me. Cubs are at the Cubs are 7 back. The Cardinals are 11 and a half back. Pirates 11 and a half back. And Cincinnati 17 and a half back. And then we go out west, where the Dodgers have 11 and a half game lead over Arizona, 13 and a half game lead over Padres, 20 and a half games over the Giants, and the Rockies. Wow, the Rockies are 23 and a half games off the pace. So there's your baseball information for your day today, and greatly appreciate you being with us, and we will see you tomorrow, everybody. Take care.